What's new Hall of Famer Shane Van Boening's pool legacy? And where does he rank amongst other American stars? Pool legends weigh in on these topics and more on this episode of Billiards Digest Live, coming at you right now.
Welcome to this midsummer edition of Billiards Digest Live. I'm Mike Panozzo, and this is my running mate, Jason Bowman. Jason, it's been a little bit quiet on the pro pool circuit since the June World Pool Championship. Now, all of that's going to change in August with the European Championship kicking off what's certain to be a frantic last 5 months of the year, but pretty slow these days.
Yeah, it does seem to be that way, and I think summer has traditionally always kind of been a slower time for pool, but we've had so much the last 18 months or so, new events being announced and, some controversies and drama here, and you had the, Federer changing sides. There's just been so many different things, I think, the last 18 months that July certainly seems to be a little slow, but I think that's okay, because it's going to give us an opportunity to kind of dive in a little bit and talk about some different things. I mean, we just celebrated our great nation's birthday. You've got the Summer Olympics coming up in just a few days. You got the U.S. Open next month. So it seems to be the perfect time for a real red, white, and blue episode of Billiards Digest Live, I think.
Yeah, that gives us the opportunity. In fact, the lull in action gives us a chance to go red, white, and blue and talk about Shane Van Boening's Hall of Fame induction at the end of November. And because Van Boening will be the first American-born inductee since 2018, we decided to ask some of the game's greatest players to share their thoughts on the South Dakota kid's vaunted resume and weigh in on where he fits in the discussion of the greatest American players in history. We started by pulling together a handful of American Hall of Famers, a few veteran European Hall of Famers, and a couple of Shane's contemporaries. And the first thing we posed to them was, give us your impressions and analysis of Shane's game and his record over the past 15 to 20 years. Here were their responses.
We're having this little discussion. This is Shane Van Boening's Hall of Fame year, and as you know, he's the first U.S.-born player to get into the Hall of Fame since 2018. And, you've been around for quite a while. You've seen his whole career. Talk me through, your impressions of Shane. What makes him special? Where did you see him from the beginning of his career to where he is now? What are your thoughts on Shane as the great player that he is?
I think with Shane, it kind of originated with me with hearing a little bit about him. Of course, some action stories. I think whenever Shane was first hitting the scene, 10-ball was starting to become, a little more prevalent in the game as far as on the tournament side of things. So he was going around and, his uncle and a few other people were kind of making games for him. And Shane was just, kind of laying people to waste. But, I mean, you hear about that, and it seems like anytime someone's kind of new to the scene, it's almost like they're a little more untouchable until they get touched on a little bit. But that just didn't happen to Shane too much at the beginning. And I actually played him a couple times at the Reno Sands tournament is where I really got to meet him as far as playing him. And you could see a lot of talent there, a little different as well. I thought right from the get, first seeing him, to watch him hit the ball. And, technically he's kind of changed through the years off and on, but he was just very poised, had a lot of confidence around the table. And, just like a lot of players, again, when they first come out, they're real hot and all, but you never know what it's going to evolve into. But it's pretty incredible what did happen with Shane.
Well, with Shane now, right when I was ending my career, he was just starting his. So I never really watched him play a lot when he was playing. Now, having said that, I've done a couple of tournament matches where I commentated and watched him play. And, when you talk about Shane, things that come to mind with him, when you talk about records or getting close to records, his name always seems to be at the top of the list. He's just a phenomenal player, and the only people that I think, or the only person that can handle him on the table, may be David Copperfield.
Yeah, no, he's a special talent. So you have done some of his matches. What parts of his game impressed you? What makes him the player he is?
Well, he plays like the players in my era, or most of them, are myself and Earl, and a lot of us back then. We wound up and we shot, and big stroke, long stroke, hard break, shot hard. You know what I mean? Just an all-around great player, and knew how to win. I mean, this guy, it's just phenomenal, the stuff that he has done. I don't know all about his records, but I know 5 U.S. Opens. I know that in itself is a Hall of Fame career right there by far.
I first started seeing him, I think it was during the IPT he was coming on the scene, so that should be around 2005, 6, in my case. And yeah, I mean, it was just easy to notice right from the beginning that the guy has like his kind of own style, own little bit flair in his game, and I think ever since from the first time I knew him, he seemed like he always had that big break, but he's really developed it, and he kind of changed. He changed the way guys were breaking balls, like 8-ball and 10-ball, especially. Right. Like the 9-ball side break was different because that's just. It's a little bit more control more than power, but his power break on from the box is obviously like one of the best. Might not be the best control, but he does have enough power, and even when he doesn't hit it good, he's got enough bounce where it just beats the scratch into the side, and he's just like he created like a new style of breaking, and then people had to study him because it was just too strong, kind of interesting.
How did you see his game progress over the course of the time you've known him?
Yeah, like when I first recognized him, I think he wasn't like mentally struggling, but I don't think his putting was that good in the like 2006, 7. But then he did kind of just have this high gear and a big break. And, when you're breaking that well, it adds confidence to your game, and it's, easy to just get into the flow of things. And, you can really maybe, just by sheer fact that you're, producing runs, just keeping the other guy on the seat. So, he's not going to do much from there. So he's break was a big advantage for him then, but now he's got like a more well-rounded game as he's come along, and he's played. He's shown that he's a good all-around player, even one pocket and straight pull.
Well, a funny sidebar is that when I was doing exhibitions for R.J. Reynolds, that was like in the maybe mid 90s, and Shane, I used to do Sturgis. I did all these bike rallies, and I used to go to Sturgis, and I'm at the table. They had a table set up where they would challenge me one game. If they beat me, they'd get a shirt or something. And who would come to my table? Shane Van Boening. Actually, I have a picture of him and me together when he must have been 7, 8, 9 years old. And he looked at me like really idolized me, you know what I'm saying? And then a lot of the stuff he did, he said I had talked to him. I really didn't see him compete a ton. I've seen him in the last couple of years at Pat Fleming's. He's a phenomenal, he's got a great touch. He's got a phenomenal break, and he doesn't rattle too often in pressure situations. So, he's a phenomenon. I didn't even know his record was as good as what we were talking about earlier. So now I'm second guessing my list of the top 10, but that's okay.
There's so many great stories I have with Shane that I think just defines what he is and who he is. But probably the greatest story I have was I was with him in Germany. We're playing the World Team Championships. And I remember he says, Oscar, let's practice. Place opens at 10 a.m. And of course, I'm young and I'm trying to, out practice this kid. And, like 8 hours go by. He says, you want to go get some food? I'm like, yeah, let's go eat. And, usually I sit down for a little bit, digest, and go back to practicing. He just jumped on it, shooting the same shot for hours and hours and hours. Now, the venue closed at 11 p.m. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to stop before this kid. 9 or 10 p.m. rolls around. Now, mind you, we started at 10 a.m. Now it's 9 or 10 p.m. and my feet are killing me. I can't stand it anymore. I'm like, you know what? I quit. Shane kept practicing until they finally kicked him out. Okay. And I realized that there's not many people who are going to outwork this kid. But I mean, it was just there's so many great stories of him practicing and dedicating himself to the sport. And it's really no surprise to me to see what he's accomplished in the game. He dedicated his life to the sport.
Well, obviously, I don't think he needs many things to say about. He's definitely a top 5 player still in the world today. And to me, maybe shouldn't say by far the number 1 US player, but to me, he is the number 1 US player that ever picked up the cue. Obviously, I have not played against all of them. There are so many greats, but he is definitely the one that I could watch the most, that I have probably played the most. And by saying that, to me, there is no doubt that he is the number 1 US player that ever picked up a cue. Now, that's obviously only from the things that I've seen personally and from the experience playing against him. I'm not a big video watcher, and I know there are some other greats around, and I've played a lot of the all-time greats as well. But Shane, has developed a game in all the disciplines that I'm not even a regular competitor at. That's, he has the overall game. Yeah. Doesn't matter if it's 8-ball, 9-ball, 10-ball. Straight ball might be his weakest game, but it's still very, very strong. Not talking about bank pool, one pocket, and maybe there are some other games that I don't even have heard of. But he's on top in almost every discipline.
Just a great talent, and from what I heard of, when I was hearing him coming up, that he was like me. He was a practice maniac, just practice and play. So and I wasn't surprised to hear that he was started at such a young age, because and then his mom was played, and I met his uncle, hung out with his uncle, and so this seems like one of those things that it's like a destiny thing for him, right, to be a professional pool player and now in the Hall of Fame. It just seemed like something that it was a foregone conclusion from when he was a little kid. So it's pretty awesome to see, from the beginning, right?
Yeah, exactly. What do you see about his game compared to other players you've seen over the years? What are his strengths? What does he do really well?
His break, of course, when he came on the scene for us, it was right when 10-ball was the big deal, and nobody really figured out the break like he did, and it's evidenced by all the big 10-ball tournaments and stuff. But his game has evolved, with everything now. You put the cut break on him now with the 9-ball, and he figured out a way to win. And 8-ball, I think. And it's myself, I always loved 8-ball. So I always considered that my best game. And I know he probably would say the same thing too, is, 8-ball is his best game. So, and that big break is like, I played him many times in, Wyoming and all the bar box stuff and all that. It's very, very hard to fade that break, like Johnny Arthur in the 90s. It's hard to overcome that guy's break. Yeah.
Right.
Glowing praise from a pretty stout lineup of great pool players there. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, if Shane's resume wasn't enough, to hear some of his peers talk so glowingly about him is very impressive. And also impressed at your ability to get all those guys to do interviews and to get all that scheduled. Pool players are typically not the best to schedule, but
I've got the dirt on a lot of them,
yeah.
so they own me.
As far as what I heard there, you hear a lot of the same things from those. The break is a big part of his game. I thought what Jeremy Jones said at the very beginning was said a lot, and that was, Shane kind of came out, and a lot. You see this with a lot of players. They kind of come out, they're new. The rest of the field doesn't know who they are. They excel early on, but then everybody kind of catches up. They learn their style. They analyze their game. It's like in any sport, you review enough video and you make adjustments, and then their game comes down a little bit.
Right.
You haven't seen that with Shane. A lot of them talked about his ability to evolve or adapt.
Right.
Again, that speaks to his longevity in the sport. I mean, you're talking about almost 2 decades as the top player now. And so, again, a testament to really his strengths, his ability to play multiple formats. Doesn't matter if it's 8-ball, 9-ball, even 10-ball. Shane can excel in all of them. And so, I think we knew everything that we heard there for the most part, but to hear a group of Hall of Famers comment and have so much praise for him just adds to his impressive resume to me.
Yeah, it does. I think one of the things that stood out to me was the discussion of his work ethic.
Yeah.
And he's renowned for putting more time in at the practice table than anyone in the history of the game.
Yeah.
Even 15 years after he became a pro player. So we know how hard it is to get to be number one, and work ethic it takes just to get there.
Yeah.
And then to maintain that over a long period of time is one of the things that makes him truly, truly special.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Shane's kind of a pool prodigy, essentially. I mean, he was brought up in the game of pool. His grandfather owned a pool room. He spent a lot of time there. His mom is an accomplished player. Right. His uncle an accomplished player that got him traveling. So, he grew up very much around the game. And, I think one of the other things that has attributed to his success is kind of his ability to, we'll say, self-isolate within the environment, right? Like, I know Shane has talked publicly. Most people know Shane is deaf, wears a hearing aid. And so he will turn that off sometimes in matches. But he almost seems to have a mental ability, too, to really kind of shut everything else out and just focus in a way that I don't know that most players can. I think that's another of the things that separates him from the other greats.
Yeah, it's an interesting point to bring up because I know that about Shane. I've been to events where he's stayed in other hotels.
Yeah.
When he goes to a tournament, it's all business. He's there to play, he's there to win. So he'll stay at another hotel. He doesn't hang around, go out eating with other people. When the tournament matches are over, he'll find a local pool room and he'll hit balls until they chase him out. And the first thing the next morning, the first guy in any of these pool rooms or practice areas is going to be Shane.
Yeah.
And, that's, again, it's that work ethic and that dedication to treating this like a job that makes him really special.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, following those glowing comments, we asked our group of distinguished guests where Shane ranks among American players over the past 50 years, a period we might look at as, say, pool's modern era. In fact, we asked them all to give us their top 10 American players from 1975 to present, and their responses were very interesting. Now, due to time constraints, you're going to see only part of each of the players' top 10 lists. The full interviews will be posted on the APA Facebook and YouTube pages in the coming weeks.
So, let's look at the big picture of American-born pool players. Let's say over the last 50 years. And you've been around for more than 30 years of that. Where does Shane rank? If you listed and we've asked you to do this, your top 10 American-born players of the last 50 years, where does Shane rank and why?
I got him at the top. And it wasn't too difficult for me to put him there. Longevity, the dominance of the longevity, and still going, still has a lot left. Now we'll see how long he plays. The careers of pool players are a little different these days, especially the guys at the top.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of guys that played very long times and very successfully, but I don't know if we've ever had someone that was that dominant overall. Especially, it's not just with Americans. We're talking about top Americans, of course, but he just kind of dominated the world, especially when they came to America. But looking at, like I said, improving in all ways, winning a bunch of different disciplines in all kinds of ways as far as that. We all have our favorite formats and different places we like to play, but Shane really made it all very good for him. And I think it was a pretty easy choice for me at number one for Shane.
Who do you have at number two?
I got Earl Strickland. Yeah, Earl the Pearl. I think I say easy as far as Shane, but I mean Earl's the guy that did make you think about things. Of course, they both have 5 U.S. Opens. Earl has a few more world titles. But yeah, Earl was an incredible guy. I wish he would have played a few more other disciplines just to see him play them a little more often. Because of the few times I did get to see him play one pocket in different games, I really enjoyed it. And he's one of the greatest 8-ball players of all time as well, which is another thing you can say about SVB.
Yeah. Number three.
Nick Varner. The Kentucky Colonel. I just feel like he kept it going. Maybe won a big tournament in 5 different decades. I don't know, 4 different decades. Had some of the most incredible individual years that the game's ever seen. And just never seemed to play himself out of it. He was never out of an event. Never gave up. Like I said, longevity. I know it as well as anyone. He won a world 9-ball title in '99.
Right.
Not sure exactly how old he was at that point, but he was no spring chicken, fighting a lot of youngsters, and actually beat me in the final. We were rooming together that year there in Spain. But just an incredible player for all ways as far as talent and for the sport itself. But if you just talk about on the table, I think Nick's right up there with all of them.
On my list is number one, and the only reason I had Earl at number one is because that I went through Earl. Earl was playing with me, most of all of my career, and that's why I put Earl in front of Shane. Now, having said that, also I think their both careers are very similar. So you might know something that I don't know, and you can help me out on that. But
no, I don't think.
But that's what happened there, and that why I put Shane at number two.
Yeah, I don't think you can go too wrong. Putting either one of them one ahead of the other or one right behind the other. And we're talking about, your top 10 list for the top 10 U.S.-born players over the last 50 years. And you did have Earl number one, and you did play against Earl, during his heyday. What was his game like?
Oh, his game was phenomenal. Earl played when he was playing pool, he played like his hair was on fire. This guy, it was incredible. And Louis Roberts gave him the correct name. Louis used to call him Strychnine, and I thought that just fit Earl perfect. And when he was playing, in his matches, Earl, he had the personality of a Molotov cocktail. This guy, I mean, it was just incredible. And he might have been the only guy that ever get away with doing that, and then coming back and getting stronger as he got madder or more volatile. And I think it was 82 or 83. Earl beat Mizrak. I believe it was in Lake Tahoe.
Right.
And that was his rite of passage. Once he beat Mizrak, that was his rite of passage right there on into greatness.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So let's move on your top 10 list. You had Earl number one, Shane number two. You had Mike Siegel number three. Tell me about him.
Mike Siegel, Mr. N. I'll get back to that story shortly, Mr. N. If there was one guy that I was told that I could only watch one guy for the rest of my life play pool, it would be Mike Siegel. Now, I'm talking about video, no audio. but anyway, Mike was at the table. He was just phenomenal to watch his antics and the way he moved around the table, and he hardly ever shot the wrong ball, made any mistakes. And if he did, he would tell you about it. But Mike was just, I loved watching him play. And I was fortunate enough to beat him in a final, maybe a couple of finals. I can't remember, but I think just one. And wow, I didn't get to see his career in the 70s. We're going from 75 on, but I didn't start playing on tour till 85, and that was 10 years before. You know, he had won enormous amount of tournaments before then. So that's why I have Mike at number 3.
Do rank like Earl Strickland as number 1 on my list. You know, I definitely like, you know, playing 9-ball as a power player. I think he's just you know, he pioneered this style of playing, this power play, and like really just high gear, big stroke, moving the cue ball a lot, being able to just like do serious damage at any given time in a match. You know, he'd be like he's a threat to, like, you know, put like a 6-pack anytime. It was just like in like the 90s, he was the player to watch, because, you know, if you wanted to play proper 9-ball, you know, like Efren's a great 9-ball player, but he just he didn't have the same like high gear,
Right.
just because, you know, just that's Earl, you know. Watching Earl was like added a little bit another dimension to my game. And when I saw Earl, he actually came to Finland 1992. He did some like exhibitions, and I played a little exhibition match against him, and I was like just flabbergasted. Like, it's just like he's just the power and just the flow. I was like, okay, this is like, you know, this is, I have to raise the bar, you know. I have to like raise my own standards, because it's like, you know, if I'm gonna be, you know, competing with guys like this, I just, it was kind of interesting, because it just like I needed to make a quantum leap in my game to even like hold a fork there. So so that really inspired me, and that's why Earl is like definitely number 1 on that list.
Who's your number 2?
And I have Nick Varner as number 2, because it's just watching him play, you know, like I got to witness him like ever since like 1992. You know, he played in the Challenge Cup. I went to see him play in Taipei, 1992. Like I just walked into a room, and, you know, I'm watching him like warm up straight ball, and he runs like 250 balls, like, and then he plays second in that international tournament in Taiwan, and then, you know, going traveling a little bit, and then eventually going to the States in 1996, where he was still very active, and watching him play all these games, and then knowing that all the titles he's won before, it's just like he's cemented a legacy that is just hard to argue. You know, he plays all the games well, and I've watched him win a bunch of tournaments, you know, in person. So he's just, you know, he has that history, and he's titles, and where, you know, Shane isn't there yet. He might, you know, eventually like beat him off, you know, where I would, you know, have to rank him differently. But right now, I think Shane's coming right behind those 2 guys, because of, you know, where he's at now.
So you have Shane number 3.
Therefore, I have Shane as number 3 right now.
Well, of course, I have me as number 1. I mean, I've won a ton of tournaments. I'm the youngest man in the Hall of Fame, and I've won tournaments in almost every division. 9-ball, straight full 8-ball. I won a bunch of 1-pocket tournaments. So, you know, whatever. I guess I got to be somewhere up there. The next guy I have is Strickland. Now, see, now I'm debating whether Strickland, now in his, like I was more 80s, Earl was coming up when I was kind of fizzling out, and he took over. But I'm looking at Strickland, he was an extremely tough player to beat. He had in other words, I was never comfortable playing him, even if I had a 6-7 game lead going to 11. Let's say it was like 9-2. I still did not feel comfortable because he had that spurt where he could win 5, 6, 7, 8 games in a row before you blink. Very scary player, and he had like the raw talent, you know what I mean? And he's still out there playing today. So I had him as second. Third, I had Nick Varner. Nick, I grew up with Nick. He won a lot of 9-ball tournaments. He's won 1-pocket tournaments. He's won the World Straight Pool. When we had the Pro Tour, I think in the 90s, in the whole year, they had like 13 tournaments. He won 10 of them, and that was with everybody.
I mean, I got to start off with number one. To me, based off his credentials and everything he's done, Mike Siegel. I mean, the man won so many tournaments. He knew how to win. Another player that just knew how to win. He had the break, his safety play, Captain Hook. My dad told me he was just a tough person to play. He got in your head, and he was just a real tough guy to beat, And another person that goes back into that thing of somebody getting in your head, a tough guy to compete against, Earl the Pearl. I mean, anybody who wins 5 U.S. Opens,
doing something right.
You have to give credit. You're doing something unbelievable, and it's funny. Earl is one of those guys that, he's in his 60s, late 60s. He's around my dad's age, and he still competes at a world-class level. So that really speaks volumes to how much raw talent he had. And leads me to, number 3 is SVB, in my opinion. Also won, 6 U.S. Opens now?
5 with Earl, yeah.
5. He's tied with Earl. So, I mean, it makes sense that he's on par with Earl. You got to give Shane a little bit more time before you push him up top. I think you have to give respect to those, to Captain Hook and Earl the Pearl, and to have Shane there is, to me, it's a no-brainer.
Well, obviously, I already mentioned Shane. He is on top of my list, and I actually had a little list prepared that I cannot find now. That's great. That's great news. Hold on. I'll get to it.
Oh, here it is.
I found it. Obviously, number 2, I had actually a big debate on it, but I have to put Earl on the number 2 spot.
Yeah.
Probably everyone knows that we are not best friends, but I still respect him as one of the greats. He might be the best shot maker on earth. So I put him on number 2.
Was that
number
3? Were you debating on where to put him, or whether you wanted to put him on your list at all?
No, he definitely belongs to the list. There is no doubt. If it was a list with everything, with behavior, being a nice guy and so, he might not be on the list. But no, as a player, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Number 3 is Johnny Archer. Well, he obviously dominated the 90s, more or less. And we had, plenty of battles, especially in the Mosconi Cup, which usually the bad end on my side. Great talent, also great overall game. Not too sure about banks or 1-pocket, but these are not my special disciplines either. So, talking the regular disciplines, 8-ball, 9-ball, 10-ball, straight pool. So he's my number 3.
Well, for me, it's always going to be Steve Miserak because I got to meet Steve, and we became really good friends. And big guy. I wasn't as big as him, but left-handed, smooth player, short, compact bridge. But what makes him always my favorite is when my mentor Hawaiian Brian told me years ago he was on the road hustling pool and Mizrak, he was playing the best pool he ever played, and Mizrak offered him the 7 ball, and Brian was absolutely robbing him with the 7 ball. And they played 2 foul. There was shootout, no ball in hand that time. And he said that, and Mizrak kept pushing out to the shot and freezing the cue ball on the back rail and almost dead straight in. And the object ball was on the next shot, was all the way in the back of the other end of the table. And so you would have to give him the shot, and he would just shoot it off the back rail and pump it in and create an angle and get the cue ball all the way down. And Brian was like, and he would do that for hours and hours. And Brian, he was beating Brian after about 10 hours. And it was just too much to face. So Brian ended up winning the money. But he said Mizrak was the best I ever seen. And then I heard that multiple times. And then I met him, and, he's such a great guy. So he always had a special place in my heart with Steve. So I picked him as my number one because he's always going to be my favorite. And then, so that's how he's got my number one spot.
So who do you have after him?
Earl the Pearl, of course, man. I mean, there was 2 guys that made me want to play pool. And when I watched them, it was Efren Reyes and Earl Strickland. And, I wanted to you just watch it. Even if you didn't know anything about pool, you watch Earl play and you're like, wow, this game looks fun. So that's, and obviously all the titles and everything is just, and I played him many, many times, and he was just his shot making and always broke the balls great, but people don't realize his brain on the table was so amazing. Like the stuff he does, when you're a great player, you watch all the other greats and what they're doing, and then
Right.
At that time when I'm watching, I'm like, what would I do here? And then he's done, like, oh wow, I said that's a good, I learned that one. So it was really, not too many people can wow you. Earl wowed you, and Efren, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, Earl's yeah, he's the master. Yeah, he's the legend. Yeah.
And then what do you got following up?
I got Mike Siegel. Mike Siegel, when I was coming up and first started playing, am I still there? Yeah, young Rory Hori-Hop was the number one player, and I remember he was getting ready to go, like 1985 or 86, and he was getting ready to go on a big tournament, in the United States, and his first round was Mike Siegel, and Roy was like, he's the guy I wanted to be like him, and then he was like, man, my first match, he's telling us on the phone at the time he called, and we're all listening on the phone, and then he goes, I had to play Mike Siegel, and I was so nervous, and he was so scared, and then that's when I was like, I said, okay, if this guy could make my idol over here in Hawaii, quake in his shoes, I said, that guy must be something. So then I started watching. I'm like, oh, dude, Mike Siegel was just, it was so, watching with that break, and he bent that cue like that, but he was just so smart. He was so smart, and you're never going to outsmart him, on the table. So that, and then he won so much. It was just Siegel. At some point, it was Siegel and everybody else, So he was the guy everybody had to go through at that time, right, when you wanted to win.
Great stuff listening to those great players go over their top lists and how they position people in certain places. Pretty uniform at the top and a lot of mixture in the bottom 5 for a lot of the players. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, no big surprise. Actually, the biggest surprise was probably the fact you got them to do all that homework before before the interviews. But yeah, like you said, not a lot of surprises in the top 5 or really 6 or 7. I think pretty consistent in there was Mike Siegel, Earl Strickland, Shane Van Boening in the top 3 in some order or another, followed by Nick Varner, right, Buddy Hall, Steve Mizrak. So no real surprises. I think as you got towards the lower part of the order is where you saw some variance. I think I saw Corey Deuel on a couple of those lists.
Jeremy,
Sky
Hatch.
Woodward made an appearance on a list. Jeremy Jones, Dennis Hatch. So as you got towards 10, I think is where some of the different names would pop in. But for the most part, I felt like it was pretty consistent across the board for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, the top players, their resumes kind of speak for themselves, so you kind of know who were the absolute stars of the day.
Yeah, and it's cool to hear the guys that were going head-to-head with these players kind of have to assign them in a certain, and themselves, assess themselves. But what I'm really interested in looking at, and I'm sure you've got one, is is the Mike Panozzo list of the top 10 U.S. players of the last 50 years, because I'm sure you have given it a lot of thought as well.
I have, and I've been around for 44 of those 50 years. I've seen, I
wasn't going to go there. You went there, but that's all right.
I saw Mike Siegel and Varner and Buddy and those guys in their prime, and I've seen all these young players come up. And I do have my list, and I've got my preferences, and my list starts off with the mouth himself, Mike Siegel.
Okay.
I mean, Mike Siegel, he was one of the first pros I saw when I went to see the first big straight pool tournament, and the video here is from the 1992 U.S. Open straight pool tournament where he ran a first inning 150 and out on Mike Zuglin, and it was a thing of beauty. And you watch Siegel stalk a table and walk around. He had a nice rhythm to him. He had such style. He had a great stroke. Lefties just always look good at the table, right? And, but he was one of the smartest players to ever play. And at the same time, he could be very offensive and aggressive. 3-time world straight pool champion, 3-time U.S. Open 9-ball champion.
Right.
There was a year in '87 where he was the first player to get $100,000 in prize money over a 12-month period. And this was the days when 10,000 was a huge first prize. So there wasn't, it was just he piled up 7 or 8 tour wins in that one year. So he could take a year and completely dominate it. He has won everything under the sun. He was always known for, if he reached the final, he was winning. There were very few title matches you can find Mike Siegel on the short end of.
Yeah, well, I don't think you can go wrong with Captain Hook at number 1. At number 2, who do you got?
Then I got to go Earl Strickland.
Earl Pearl at number 2, okay.
When I saw him come up, he was the player of the 80s. He set the new standard for run-out 9-ball. When the tour turned to 9-ball and Earl Strickland hit the tour, it was an awakening. I mean, this guy, was so offensive-minded, such one of the, if not the best shot makers ever in his prime. And so he was, 5-time U.S. Open champion, 3-time world 9-ball champion, including 2 in a row, followed by his 3rd world championship a decade later. So he still had it. He could still bring it. As far as billiards, he'll always be close to my heart at Billiards Digest because he provided us with so much editorial content because you never knew what was going to happen with Earl Strickland at the table or off the table. He was on our cover 12 times.
Wow.
So, and he was 5-time player of the year. Combustible, one of the few guys who could, and it was mentioned by even Mika, he's one of those guys who could be really volatile and turn that to his advantage at the table.
Yeah, it's almost like he would kind of generate some of that to get himself going. Almost. Yeah,
he was amazing talent.
Yeah. Well, so you got Siegel at 1, Strickland at 2. I think I can guess where you'll go with number 3, but why don't you tell us anyway?
Well, if you guessed anybody other than Shane Van Boening, you guessed wrong.
Right.
Captain America, he's just been one of the top 5 players in the world for 15 years. Yeah. That's saying something. Yeah. 5 U.S. Open titles. This is his final ball in his 5th world title, his 5th U.S. Open title, which was in 2016. His first one he won was in 2007. Then World Championship runner-up in 2015 and 2016. 7 years later, follows that up by winning the World 9-ball Championship.
Longevity.
Then wins the World 8-ball Championship at 40 years old. So, talking about a player, and we talked about him plenty earlier, this guy just is a machine at the table, never gives up, never gives in, and he's been a pleasure to watch. I've watched him since he was a kid, and just one of the best ever for sure.
Now, given where he is in terms of his career, I mean, is it possible, at least on your personal list, that he could climb ahead of Strickland and/or Siegel?
He's still a top 5 player in the world, to me. So, there's still a chance he can add another world title. There's still a chance he can. He's really been gunning for that 6th U.S. Open title, which would usurp, Earl's tied with him at 5. I know how much that means to him. So, and when Shane gets focused and dedicated on something, he's pretty hard trained to slow down.
Yeah. Number 4 on your list of top 10 greatest U.S. players of the last 50 years.
Yeah, the first pro that I really became friends with in the industry back in 1980 was Nick Varner. And I've gotten to see him over the years. And here's another guy who has won every title in every discipline that there is. Two-time World 14.1 champion, back-to-back U.S. Open 9-ball titles. In 1989 on the Pro Tour, they had 16 tour events in 9-ball. He won 8 of them in 1 year. And these are with fields with Varner and with Siegel and Hall and Davenport and Strickland and Efren Reyes. I mean, it was just ridiculous what he did. So, and then to win the world 9-ball title a decade after his previous one at 51 years old is a statement in itself. I mean, he's always been one of my favorite. He's everyone's favorite. Just a great player.
Okay, so Nick Varner comes in at number 4 on your list. Number 5 is
the Rifleman, Buddy Hall.
Buddy Hall. Okay.
Buddy Hall. My Buddy Hall story is this: first tournament I went to, pro tournament, was the Straight Pool World Championship in New York. And they all had tuxedos on. They had the long fluid strokes like Siegel and Rempe and Miserak and all those guys. And then I went to my first big 9-ball pro championship, and someone said, "Listen, you're gonna watch Buddy Hall, right?" I said, "Sure." And I went and I watched Buddy Hall, watched him through a whole match. And afterwards, I saw my friend, and he said, "What'd you think?" And I said, "Well, I didn't see anything special. I mean, he never had a shot more than 2 feet. He was never more than 10% out of line. What's the big deal?" And it finally dawned on me that the big deal is that no one controlled the cue ball better than Buddy Hall. And any pro will tell you that. If they wanted to learn about controlling the cue ball, playing proper position, playing the right angles, Buddy Hall was the guy to watch. He was just a beast at the table.
All right, good pick at number 5. Moving on, number 6 is?
Johnny Archer.
Johnny Archer.
Now you're talking to a player of the decade in the 90s.
Yeah.
He was really a dominant player. I don't know if he gets enough credit for being as dominant as he was through the 90s. 4-time world 9-ball champion, twice with the Pro Billiard Tour and twice WPA. And as far as Mosconi Cups go, he's, to me, the greatest American Mosconi Cup player ever.
Wow.
Even in the heydays with Earl Strickland, the player that the Europeans feared most was Johnny Archer. He was always dialed in for Mosconi Cup. Just a great player.
Yeah.
Loved watching him play.
All right, moving on to number 7.
Steve Miserak.
The Miz, all right.
The Miz. Beautiful stroke, amazing touch for a guy as big as he was. And there's a guy who won 4 consecutive U.S. Open straight pool championships in the 70s, when there was still Joe Balsis and Jimmy Rempe and Siegel and Petey Margot and all these great players. Just a classic player, one of the great players of the game. Wasn't the strongest 9-ball player in the world, but won his share of titles, but definitely one of the great players ever.
Yeah, of course, known for the famous beer commercial. It was.
Yes. Yeah, light beer commercial,
That's
which is
right, Miller Lite.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on, number 8 on your list.
Kim Davenport. A little bit of a surprise, but Kim, I think is very underrated. He played in that era with Hall and Rempe and Varner and Siegel and Reyes and all these guys.
Yeah.
And he was a great player. Won his fair share of championships. Could have won more in any other era.
Right.
Solid player, very aggressive, fun to watch.
Yeah.
He did not shy away from many shots. So it was always fun to watch Kim play.
Yeah, and he kind of reminds me of kind of like what Vivian Villarreal went through, playing against Allison Fisher and Karen Corr and Kelly Fisher. That time period, it's like if they've been, 10 years earlier, maybe it would have been a little different, a few more titles. And the other thing with Kim Davenport, career ended early on an injury, right?
Yeah, he was a big golfer, still is a big golfer, but got hit in the eye with an errant golf ball.
Oh, wow.
And lost his vision in that eye for quite a while and never got it back 100%. Tried to come back a little bit, but by then he was a little bit older anyways. But yeah, it derailed his career a little earlier than it should have been.
Yeah.
But yeah, terrific player.
All right, so moving down the list, we're at number 9.
Another one from the Siegel-Varner era, Jim Rempe. King James had a great stroke. Another one of those guys, wide stance, long fluid stroke. He could play all games well. Great straight pool player, great 9-ball player. Saw him win some huge 9-ball tournaments. And he was, another one of those stylish, very smart, calculating pros from back in that day. Fun to watch. Beautiful stroke, yeah.
All right,
Jim
rounding
Rempe.
out your top 10.
The racket, Rodney Morris.
Okay.
Yeah, Rodney Morris, he was an incredible talent, flashy, fun to watch. As you can tell from the interviews, great personality.
Yeah.
And, he got derailed for a couple of years with personal issues. Otherwise, I think we'd have seen him win, quite a few more titles.
Yeah.
I usually don't pick people on potential, but, they robbed a couple of years from him that he was at the top of his game. Always been one of my favorite players to watch.
Yeah, well, he still found his way into the Hall of Fame in 2016.
He did.
I believe
He
all
did.
10 of these guys have found their way to the Hall of Fame. I
They
know
are.
Kim Davenport went in through meritorious service back in 2018, but definitely a solid list. So we crunched some numbers.
We did.
Right? We took
yeah.
all the input and we found a way within your computer-like brain to compile a list based on some formulas, and here we're seeing the list, and this is based on the overall feedback that you got,
what
right?
we did was if you had a first place vote on someone's ballot, you got 10 points, second votes got 9 points, and so on. And this is what the list looked like. And you see Earl Strickland's at the top of this list, and that's because he was named either first or second on every, all 8 of the lists that we came up with.
That's true.
So, he was never worse than second.
Yeah.
Mike Siegel up there.
Anywhere from first to third. Yeah,
right.
he and Shane.
Shane Van Boening, Nick Varner,
Yeah.
Buddy Hall. They were all, again, the top of everybody's list were pretty similar.
Okay.
Just a couple of, tweaks in where they had them first or third, second or fourth, whatever. But, really strong list.
Okay. So let's, I want to do this. I want to grade your list by comparing it to the mathematical list. I think we've got both of them teed up. Here we go. So you've got Panozzo and had Siegel and Strickland kind of reversed of where they ended up on the combined list. But otherwise, Mike, look, you got Shane at 3, you got Varner at 4, Buddy Hall at 5, Johnny Archer at 6, Mizurek at 7. So identical to the combined list. And then a little bit of a variance there towards the end. Alan Hopkins actually comes in at number 9 on the combined list, which is, of course, another Hall of Famer. But pretty good consistency there, Mike.
Well, I've been
you know
around.
what you're talking about.
I've been around for a bit, and really, Alan Hopkins, Rodney Morris for my number 10. You could have flip-flopped a couple of those players for sure. Alan was a great all-around player. Another one from that Varner Siegel era. But to me, what the list showed, everybody's list showed, is that the top 4, to me, Shane, Earl, Mike Siegel, Nick Varner. Those are to me the Mount Rushmore of pool pros from 75, the last 50 years.
Yeah.
I don't think there's no one to me who threatened to squeeze into that top 4 list. I thought those top 4 were far and away the best, and they all have the same thing in common. They all had dominant years where they absolutely crushed everyone. They all had longevity where they won their first world championship one year and win another one a decade later. That's an incredible thing to be able to do, given how great the talent is in pool and how there's always the next guy coming up to knock you off the perch. So, the longevity, the work ethic, their ability to play multiple games, those 4 players, there isn't anybody else on the U.S. list of the last 50 years that, to me, can come up with that type of argument that those 4 had.
Okay. The Mount Rushmore of pool. I'm going to have to go back to my AI generator to see if I can't make something like that up. But one of the things that stood out to me from looking at this list, and again, we're talking about the last 50 years, right? It gets a little tougher if you go beyond that. I mean, you've got Mosconi and some of the others that might be in that same conversation. But for the most part, as I look at these lists, right, these players, heyday, late 70s, 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s.
Right.
But with the exception of Shane Van Boening, I mean, this is a different era. And, I look at it and I say, is it Shane's talent level that has separated him? Is it that American pool on the professional men's level has degraded from its heyday?
Right.
Is it that the global pool scene has improved so much?
Yes.
But there's,
yes.
Yeah. You see. So it's probably a little bit of a balance. But there's, when I look at it, it's like, well, these are all guys from pre-2000s, and then Shane Van Boening.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, man, we gotta find some new talent, and I know we're working towards that with the World 9-Ball Tour and some of the up-and-comers. Of course, we brought in Federer to help balance things out.
Yes.
We'll call him a Team USA member
yes,
now. But, there is a definite kind of drop-off there.
Yeah, there is, and it's a little bit disturbing because you don't see anyone else from Shane's generation, U.S. players, that even knocks at the door.
Right.
Possibly a Corey Deuel, but he's older as well. So you look at someone like a Sky Woodward, players like that, and you hope that they start turning in the type of results that get them into a list like this. But let's face it, the players from around the world have gotten stronger and stronger and stronger, and the U.S. players have had a hard time keeping up.
Yeah.
Shane's been the lone exception to that.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some work to do. As far as the other players on the list, I've always believed that the Siegels, the Varners, the Stricklands, if they were playing today's game, there would still be more Americans up on this list, because I think that if you're one of the greatest wielders of a cue in the history of the game, you could adapt to any era, regardless of what the game is, regardless of what the equipment is, things like that. So I think that those players would be on top. So yeah, we do want to see some American players kind of hold up their end going forward.
Yeah, well, fascinating to kind of look at that and hear these guys talk about who ranks where with them. So
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah,
good stuff.
Well, let's get back to the arena and get caught up on what's been happening over the past month in events that did take place. The Women's Professional Billiard Association was in action in Mount Pleasant, Michigan for the biggest event on their calendar, the Soaring Eagles Master. 64 players came out for the $40,000 added event, including top-ranked Su Shen Wei, Kelly Fisher, Allison Fisher, and Christina Tkach, runner-up in the previous two WPBA events. Sure enough, the fifth-ranked Tkach motored through 5 straight matches, including a winner's bracket final win over Margaret Fefalova-Steyer, to earn a spot in the title match for the 3rd consecutive event and her 4th event in 2024. Unfortunately for Tkach, the Masters would prove no different. 2023 World 9-Ball champion Hsieh Chao of Taiwan, whose low WPBA ranking required her to play 3 additional matches in the 48-player Stage 1 of the event, rebounded from a loss to Tkach in the winner's bracket to win 4 more matches of her own and reach the title match. And there, like she did in the final of the Predator Women's Showdown earlier this year, Chao topped Tkach to claim the $16,000 top prize. Meanwhile, the World 9-Ball Tour also held 4 ranking events in the past month. Following the World Pool Championship, players jumped from Saudi Arabia to Dubai for the Night Shot Dubai Open, where Josh Filler topped World Championship runner-up Eklund Kaci of Albania. Then Mickey Kraus of Denmark won his first World 9-Ball Tour ranking event in Romania, where he topped Poland's Hubert Lopatko. And there were 2 ranking events that took place in the U.S., and for that, no one was happier or more successful than Mosconi Cup hopeful Tyler Steyer. The Wisconsin native won his first World 9-Ball Tour event by beating Sergio Rivas to win the Big Dog 9-Ball Classic in Des Moines, Iowa. Steyer then followed that up with a win this past weekend at the Chuck Markoulis Open in Sacramento, defeating Jeremy Long in the final. Here you see those 4 events that took place over the past month for WNT ranking system. Not surprisingly, double wins bolstered Steyer's position in the World 9-Ball Tour rankings, especially in his quest to secure a spot on Team USA. So we can see on Team USA, the rankings, Steyer now is number 2 ahead of Shane Van Boening, Oscar Dominguez, and BJ Ussery, while Filler, Victor Zielinski, David Alcade, and Mickey Kraus are behind Eklund Kaci at the top of Team Europe. So the deal for Tyler Steyer is that he's in position now to get one of those automatic spots that will be determined. The first one is already determined, which is after the European Open. It's already secured by Fedor Gorst.
Right.
The second will be determined after the U.S. Open. And he's in a good position. He's got about a $3,000, $3,500 lead on Shane Van Boening for that 3rd spot. If he kind of stays even with Shane over the next couple of events, he'll earn that second automatic spot. That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I'm not surprised to see Tyler in the mix. I guess a lot of times what we see on the rankings, especially, about halfway through the year now, maybe a little further than that, is it's generally the result, Federer wins the world championship and bam, he's way up the list. Tyler's gone a little more quietly with these ranking event wins, but you can start to see this formula that Matchroom's using with these ranking points and these smaller events. So he snaps off these events, and now he's sitting firmly in second, that second spot, ahead of even SVB, which to me is a little concerning. I would have liked to have seen Shane a little higher on that list. We already know that Sky Woodward, who is not anywhere to be found on that list, and I'm not sure where he would
not
even
very
come
close to the list
in
either.
terms of the top 10, which is certainly a concern. I mean, he's going to be on Team USA as the captain, and he will play, which means he's most likely now looking at a wild card spot, which means sitting in 4 and 5 on that list were Oscar Dominguez and BJ, and so one of those two
it's going to get left behind.
It will be left behind,
right?
And I know BJ was kind of in that position last year once Federer kind of made the move from Team Europe to Team USA. So I'd like to see a little bit more from Shane over the next couple of events, and hopefully Sky as well, because I don't think there's any doubt that both of them will be in Orlando in late November for the Mosconi Cup. I just can't imagine
they will. And
Shane.
The big thing with Sky is he's going to be there. You just want the best Sky to be there.
Yeah.
So he needs to really pick up his game over the next couple months. I think really, if he was honest about it, I think that the weight and the time that he has to put into this new captaincy is probably a little more than he thought it was going to be at the beginning. So it doesn't take much distraction to keep you from being 100% focused on your game. And so we need to see Sky.
So you're saying he's at tournaments and he's not just focusing on winning his match. He's trying to keep track of who's doing what, and that's playing into.
And I think he feels the pressure of other people around him. Kind of like knowing that he's watching them.
Yeah.
And do they put a bug in his ear or whatever? It's a little more taxing than I think the players think when they take on a job like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say the other thing with Sky is he just welcomed a new one into
he
the
did.
world. I think he
Congratulations,
had a little girl just within the last week or maybe
in the last 4 days, yeah.
Yeah, so, again, that's a big life-changing event. I'm sure has impacted his ability to, maybe practice here and there. And, he may not believe that's had any impact, but it's, as a parent myself, it's hard to say. When you welcome in a new child, it certainly challenges your focus a little bit. But hopefully he can get back on track. And the thing with Skyler is, the Mosconi's been his best event, right? I mean, he's not one that's won a world championship or a U.S. Open, or he's had some success in Derby City, but he's not won the big individual titles. And hopefully that will come, but his game seems to elevate when it comes Mosconi time, and so I think we'll give him a pass for now, and then hopefully everything's worked out by the time he gets to Orlando.
Yeah, we certainly hope so.
Yeah.
One of the things that was interesting to notice about the European list was having Mickey Krause, who's played really well this year, and all of a sudden he's number 5 on the Europe list. And for the Reyes Cup, which is going to be determined earlier than the Mosconi Cup, he's in a good spot. You see Victor Zelensky's on that list now. So you can see with Europe that there could be some new faces in there, if not for both the Reyes Cup and the Mosconi Cup, at least for one or the other. Team Asia, you see there's 3 Filipinos who are in the mix right now, which the people in Manila, where the event is going to be held in October, got to be loving that.
Yeah, that Team Asia will be tough to beat, especially in the Philippines. So we'll see. But that looms, right? October is
it's right there
for October, so we're getting ever closer.
And as for world rankings, there's a new sheriff in town, and that's America's favorite adopted son, Fedor Gorst, who's ascended to the top of both the World 9-Ball Tour and the WPA World Rankings. So, we're big Federer fans here. I
think every Team USA fan it certainly is, and thank goodness that he is not headlining Team Europe anymore, because man, that would just add to a stack team already.
Yeah, I know. And he's, he won the World 9-Ball Championship, $250,000 first prize. So that will put you at the top of most lists.
Yeah, he's going to be there for a while. I think.
As we mentioned at the top of the show, it was a quiet June and July, but things start heating up in August with a pair of World 9-Ball Tour major events. First, the European Open will take place in Fulda, Germany, August 6th to 11th, where Spain's David Alcaide hopes to defend his 2023 title. A week later, the world's top players will be in Atlantic City for the 43rd U.S. Open Pool Championship, the longest running major 9-ball tournament in the world. And we've talked a lot about history today, particularly in the U.S. And just to put this event in perspective, the U.S. players mentioned in the various top 10 lists earlier own more than half of the U.S. Open titles over the event's rich history. Taiwan's Ping Chung Ko will be on hand as the event's defending champion. So, U.S. Open's always a fun event.
Yeah.
One of my favorite. To me, it's the number 2 event in the world behind the World Pool Championship.
Yeah, it's so awesome that we get to have it here in the States and be able to enjoy it. But, who do you like? I mean, obviously Federer's a contender. Josh Filler's going to be a contender. SVB, 5 titles. Home turf, if you will, always a contender. But you've got the contingent of Asian players.
Yeah.
And you just, I always feel like at any given time, one of these guys comes over and he may not be a household name yet, but they snap off these major titles.
We've seen it in the past year with Robbie Capito and Yang, from China. So, I'm kind of fancy on Singapore's Aloysius Yap.
Okay.
He's right. He doesn't get talked about a lot,
yeah.
but he's at the top of every list that there is because he just is so
top
consistent.
Of the Team Asia list that we just showed, right?
And so I like his chances to finally snap off one of these big, independent, open majors.
Okay.
And we'll see if he can do that. He's got 3 opportunities, 3 big events coming up on the Matchroom calendar: the European Open, the U.S. Open, the Hanoi Open. I like his chances.
Yeah. Well, so if July was a slower month, we're getting ready to amp things up again
It
as
is.
we get in August, right?
From now till the end of the year is going to be pretty hectic schedule.
Buckle up.
And here are a few of the events to keep an eye on in the next month. WPBA has 2 events, the Iron City Invitational and the Palmetto Billiards Invitational, sandwiched around the European Open Championship and the U.S. Open Championship, both of which will be aired on DAZN. So, lots to look forward to.
Yeah, pace yourself. It's going to be a strong finish between now and.
I'm old. I have to pace myself on everything.
Now and the end of November, you've got so much. I mean, you got the U.S. Open, you've got the Reyes Cup, you've got the Mosconi Cup, and in the mix, you got the European Open, the Hanoi Open. And it's going to be a packed couple of months, and so we're excited. I'm sure the fans are excited as well.
And we'll be on top of all the action
That's right.
to bring them the insight on everything. So, but that's going to do it for us for now. For Mike Panozzo, this is Jason Bowman. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Billiards Digest Live. May all your shots be hangers, and we'll see you next month.